last one. Good to see everybody here this evening. We are very close to closing out our study of the book of Genesis. It's going to be a little deceptive because you're saying, if you're looking at your outline, you're seeing Genesis 49. You're saying, okay, that means 49 and then 50. But I'm going to actually take 49 tonight and stretch it into 2 lessons. So that means we're going to have the first half of 49 tonight, next week the second half of chapter 49, and then the following Wednesday will be the grand finale, the last chapter, chapter 50. So including tonight, there's 3 more lessons. Hopefully I didn't confuse you. But let's look at chapter 49 this evening. And let's begin to close out the lives of Jacob and Joseph. Primarily, we'll be dealing with Jacob in these last couple chapters. And so the storyline up to this point, including last week, was really a lot about Joseph the last few chapters or so. But we conclude, coming back to the tail end of things, the last years of Jacob, and particularly his last words and blessings to the children, as we will see it tonight. The matter of dealing with a will is quite a delicate issue. Yesterday, I went to a meeting. They sent me a card in the mail that said, if you come to this meeting, we'll feed you dinner, and we'll then try to sell you our product, which was, of course, a living trust is what they were selling. And they started out the meeting by saying, hey, listen, you really don't want to do a will. You want to do a living trust. That's really the better way to go. And since we now have you where we want you, that we've convinced you it's got to be a living trust and not a will, hey, by the way, can we X amount of dollars sell you this living trust? Well, I went through the informational meeting and enjoyed the meeting and enjoyed the dinner afterwards. That was free dinner. I mean, it was at the Wigwam Resort, so it was like first class, some kind of fancy chicken and all this good stuff. Again, dessert, raspberry cheesecake dessert. It was good. But they wanted to sell you the living trust, and I liked the information, but I said, I'm going to shop around a little bit because they try to get you with their price, and you want to look around. But all that aside, you're thinking, why is he talking about this? Well, what we're going to see in chapter 49 in these, 27 verses? Anyway, the whole chapter 49, is we're going to kind of do something that's similar to a will. And that is in Old Testament times, rather than reading a will, they would look at their sons, the aged father would, and he would extend to them a blessing. He would read or just in his own words say, here's what I see for what you've done, and here's your future. And we're going to really focus on the idea of what was in the future of Jacob's sons as we read the blessing together. And so in Jacob's case, he was telling most of his family that they were a family with a future. Of course, a good future in most cases. Now, some of Jacob's sons learned that their past conduct had cost them their future inheritance. But that's only going to be some of them, and other ones we'll talk about the great future that was ahead for them. And, when we talk about, if you were not to be on the good end of a will that was given to the family, and you got cut out of the will, or you didn't get the blessing, as we'll see here with some of Jacob's sons, there's an old verse that kind of applies to that. Remember, Galatians chapter 6 and verse 7 says, whatever a man sows, that also he shall reap, right? So, that sometimes ends up in a will, or the blessing, as we'll see tonight, when you don't get something because of what you've done. Now, something else we can learn about the blessing that's given here in chapter 49 is that it gave Jacob's descendants great encouragement and confidence in the years to come. That would be important. It certainly must have helped them during their time of suffering later on in Egypt. Remember before the great Exodus, before Moses delivers them, they're in Egypt, and these sons could remember that their father extended a blessing to some of them. And again, it probably helped them during their wilderness wanderings before they would get to the promised land. But in this blessing, what Jacob is doing is he is assuring them, each of them, of a future place in the promised land, and I'm sure that would have meant a great deal to them. In addition to all these things, Jacob's last witness and testimony was a beautiful revelation, I think, of our gracious Lord and how He has a great future for us in the person of Jesus Christ if we choose to follow Him. But the main thing I want you to see tonight is that Jacob's family was indeed a family with a future, and the same can be true with our families today. So let's take a look. Now we're in chapter 49 of Genesis. Let's take a look at Jacob's sons and the blessings that he pronounced to them. And you'll see on your outline, of course, that there are 12 sons. And you'll notice on your outline that the first 6 sons are the sons from Leah. And that's what we're going to cover tonight, is the first 6 sons, the sons of Leah. And then next week, we'll look at the second set of 6 sons, and those sons were the sons of BILHAH, Zilpah, and Rachel. Remember, BILHAH and Zilpah were the baby-making competition servants that Rachel and Leah had as they were trying to compete for Jacob's attention. And so those were the, what do you call those? The word, handmaid. And they were basically concubines used to produce babies as well. So we'll look at those 6 sons next week, the sons of BILHAH, Zilpah, and Rachel. And remember, just as a trivia, without looking at the notes there, remember who were Rachel's sons? The best sons, right? Joseph and Benjamin. And we'll really finish it off next week with talking about the blessing that was given to them. But let's look at the sons of Leah right here in chapter 49. I'll begin by reading verses 1 through 4. So God gave Jacob 6 sons by Leah. Remember, that was the wife that he didn't even want initially, but he got 6 sons from Leah. And Leah was distinguished as being the mother of Levi, who founded the priestly tribe, and she was the mother of Judah, who founded the royal tribe. Did you catch that? The priestly tribe and the royal tribe, coming from the wife that Jacob didn't even want. God does funny things in funny ways, right? But you get the 2 prominent tribes, the priestly tribe, Levi, and the royal tribe, Judah, from, of course, who comes from the tribe of Judah, the most famous person on the earth? There you go. So, let's take a look at Leah's sons. We'll begin with Reuben here, and I'm going to start at verse 1, but Reuben really doesn't get talked about until verses 3 and 4, but let's start in the beginning. Chapter 49, verse 1, it says, "And Jacob called his sons and said, Gather together, and I might tell you what shall befall you in the last days. Gather together and hear, you sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel, your father." He's got the mic. Listen to me, right? Now, watch verse 3. He says, "Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity, and the excellency of power." And I would have just thought that Reuben thought in his mind, okay, just stop there, Dad. Don't say any more. But what does he go on to say? Look at verse 4. He says, you're the powerful one, the dignified one. And then in verse 4 he says, "Unstable as water, you shall not excel, because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it." And then he adds, "He went up to my couch." So Jacob spoke directly to Reuben, the oldest son, but what he had to say wasn't very complimentary, at least at the end. What had happened was an old sin that maybe Reuben thought to some extent, okay, that's the past, We've got, that's been set aside. Old sin that he had committed, now it finally caught up with Reuben. And this caused him to lose his privileges as the firstborn son. Jacob gave that blessing instead to who? Anyone know the rest of the story? He didn't give it to Reuben. He gave the blessing of the firstborn to Joseph, who wasn't even the firstborn, but guess what? He was the firstborn of Rachel's sons. Joseph and then Benjamin. So, added reason as to why. Maybe in Jacob's mind, he loved Joseph so much and Rachel that he wanted to just give it to Joseph anyway, but this was extra incentive. Reuben slept with his concubine, and so because of that, the blessing, or the firstborn right, did not go to Reuben. And so it turned out that this was a man, Reuben, who should have brought honor and dignity and excellency to the sons. He should have been the leader. He should have been the firstborn, the prominent one, honor to the family. But instead, he turned out to be a weak man who disgraced his family by defiling his father's bed. That's what it says right there in the text. He had sexual relations with BILHAH, one of his father's wives, and you can read about that in Genesis chapter 35 and verse 22. So this caused Jacob then, look at verse 4, to label Reuben as what? Unstable as water. See, water can be pushed around. Water can be blown around by winds or moved around by a person's hand in the water. It's unstable. Water is unstable. And so it can become very turbulent. Okay? And so this is the weakness that typified Reuben's life as an arrogant and reckless person in his behavior. And Jacob knew that Reuben was not fit to enjoy the privileges of being the firstborn. So, now we go on, look at verse 5. Next in line, we're going by age, we have Simeon and Levi. Let's pick it up in verse 5. Verse 5. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Now see, this is, remember, who's talking here? This is Jacob, right? Given the blessing. He says to them, Simeon and Levi, their brothers, instruments of cruelty are in their dwelling place. Let not my soul enter their counsel. Let not my honor be united to their assembly, for in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they hamstrung an ox. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. That's poetic form because Jacob and Israel are the same. So that's the outcome. That's their future. Not good, right, at the end of verse 7. But let's go back to verse 5. Yes, sir, Jim?
I guess it's not actually mentioned except at this one spot. Do you think they actually literally hamstrung an ox because they were angry?
I don't know. That's a good question. I know the first part is very true about the fact that they slew a man in their anger. Well, yeah, that's exactly. So let's talk about this. So Reuben's sin, his costly sin was lust, but Simeon and Levi were guilty of what? Anger. You have lust, you have anger, and then you have anger in their case, anger that led to violence, okay? In their unrestrained massacre of the Shechemites, which Jim just pointed out, not just one man, but several people they killed. So what's the story behind that? Well, remember, it was the rape of their sister, Dinah. Was it right for them to avenge the rape of their sister, Dinah, by doing what they did? Well, it was right that they seek revenge, but they went overboard. They just didn't get the one guy who among the Shechemites was Shechem. They didn't just get him. They instead wiped out an entire place. I can't remember the number, but there's a lot of people, which included men, their wives, and their children. Innocent people. They took the lives of innocent people to gratify their own seething desire of revenge. That's where they went overboard. Yes, Jim? I thought it was the women and children too. You know what? You might be right. They took them as, well, still, they caused them to suffer too. But yeah, now that I think about it, it was just the men that they actually killed. But then they took their wives, their property, everything. They just went overboard in their revenge. And so look at verse 5. What does Jacob call them in verse 5? He calls them instruments of cruelty. And even Jacob, he says in verse 6, he says, I don't even want them in my assembly. I don't want them to sit together with me as we assemble together to worship God. I don't want them there. Boy, that's pretty harsh for your father to say that, right? Don't even want my son there in church services, okay? That's kind of the parallel. And then in verse 7 he says, and if you follow the story, verse 7 says that they were divided and they were scattered. So that's a pretty generalized statement there, but certainly that was not a good outcome. And I don't know why, but I guess they were just so similar that Jacob felt the need to lump them together, Levi and Simeon. Okay, Simeon and Levi. Well, next we have after that the fourth born son, which was Judah. Now we come to a son that really has some interesting facts behind him, Judah. I want to start now in chapter 15 at verse 8. Verse 8, remember this is Jacob speaking, and I'm maybe just picture him looking right at Judah, saying, Judah, you are he whom your brothers shall praise. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's children shall bow down before you. And then he kind of maybe looks away from Judah and he says to the others, Judah is a lion's whelp from the prey, my son. Now I think he looks back at Judah. He says, from my prey, my son, you have gone up. He bows down. He lies down as a lion. And as a lion, who shall rouse him? Verse 10, the scepter. Here's where you get the royalty, right? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh comes. And to him, that's God, shall be the obedience of the people. So what's he going to do? He's even going to cause the people to obey. That's pretty cool, huh? Where did I leave off? Where was I at? Verse 11. Nope. Into verse 10. To him shall be the obedience of the people. Yeah, and then verse 11. Binding his donkey to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He washed his garments in wine. Look at that, vine and wine rhymes, right? And his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth are whiter than milk. We'll go back up to verse 8. It's interesting that Jacob brought up the sins of Reuben and Simeon and Levi, as we've seen so far, but he said nothing about Judah's at least one sin. Remember something that Judah did that was not so good? And Jacob didn't talk about that. What did Judah do? Yep, that's one. And then there's one that I'm also thinking of, the one I'm really thinking of, but you're right too. But the other one is that he was the one that suggested the brothers sell Joseph into slavery, okay, many years earlier than this. And I think maybe the reason why Jacob could overlook that is because he realized that Judah did something that ended up in the providence of God, saving Joseph's life, and saving the lives of his brother and his father and his people, and saving the lives of many people in Egypt because they were able to store up the grain, and it resulted in the saving of many people's lives during the famine. And of course, as Jim mentioned, Jacob said nothing about Judah's sin with Tamar. Tamar, remember, he inadvertently raped her, or not really raped her, had sexual relations with her. She's the one that seduced him and pretended to be a prostitute. That's all in Genesis chapter 38. But it seems to me that Jacob came to view Judah more favorably as you look at these words. After all, I mean, Judah was the one, remember, who was willing to be Benjamin's substitute if the governor of Egypt was going to hold him hostage. He said, I don't want, basically I'm paraphrasing, I don't want my dad to be upset about his favored son, Benjamin. I'll take his place. I'll go ahead and be the substitute. So, yes, sir, Jim.
They may have never informed their father that Judah was the one who did that.
Could be. It's in chapter 43. I feel like that word got back to him. I mean, that's probably what Joseph wanted to happen. But anyway, Judah was the spokesman also for the brothers in confessing their sins before the governor. Remember, we went back. He was the guy, if you look at the text, that spoke on behalf of the brothers. We sinned. We blew it. Now God's wrath is coming on us. I'm paraphrasing again. Judah was the one who was the spokesman as confessing the sins before Joseph the governor. And Judah, he made some mistakes, but he also did some things that were right with his father and his family. And I think that was the difference between him and his 3 elder brothers who, as you see now, are in the doghouse that we've mentioned already. Okay, so, and by the way, guess what? He points this out in the text, Jacob does. What does Judah's name mean? Did you see it there? Close. It's akin to that. He's called the tribe, the lion, or anyway, Jesus is the lion of the tribe of Judah. But he uses the word praise. Do you see the word praise there? That's what the name Judah means. It means praise. Praise to God. And Judah lived up to that. He founded the royal tribe that gave Israel their kings. Praise be to God, right? And Judah was the one, also the conquering tribe and the ruling tribe of Israel. So he really stood out among the others, worthy again of God's praise. And Judah stayed faithful to the messianic line of David when God's kingdom later on, way later on in history, is divided into the southern and northern kingdoms. He stayed with the southern kingdom, loyal to God, following into the lineage of Jesus and the coming of the Messiah. So praise be to God because of Judah. Now, look at verses 11 and 12 real quick before we move on. Verses 11 and 12 speak of the future blessings for Judah's tribe. This idea, this phrase, you see it there, binding your donkey to a vine and washing your clothes in wine, that's the language of hyperbole right there. It describes a land that is so prosperous that they can do these outrageous things and not have anything to worry about it. A donkey to the vine, they're not worried about that. Usually a donkey might thrash things or tear things up. No. Clothes being washed in wine. Do you ever wash your clothes in wine? That would be a pretty expensive detergent, right, for your clothes. And it probably wouldn't have a good result either. But so this is all hyperbole to say, Jacob or Judah, you're going to be blessed. So this is a family with a future, and Judah is certainly seeing this. Well, very, very quickly, let's go to verse 13 and look at another son here, Zebulun. Verse 13, Zebulun shall dwell by the haven of the sea. He shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall adjoin Sidon. So the future of Zebulun's family included prosperity at sea. They would have land near the coast, and they would carry merchandise from the coast to the Sea of Galilee, which was a very good route. And the Bible tells us in Deuteronomy, you can look it up later on, Deuteronomy chapter 33 and verse 19 says, they shall partake of the abundance of the seas, regarding Zebulun. And so this was a very unique thing because Jews were not known for being seafaring people. And history tells us that the tribe of Zebulun did business with the Phoenicians east of them and provided imported goods to the people west of them. And so this was the prediction by Jacob that came true. And something else about Zebulun, not mentioned here in the text, is that the tribe became a very brave people with warriors who had an excellent reputation. And I don't have the time to read it tonight, but you can look over at let's do this. 1 Chronicles, let's read it real quickly here. 1 Chronicles chapter 12, verse 33. See if you can find the book of 1 Chronicles with me. Chapter 12, I'll just read it in verse 33, 33, I'm sorry. 1 Chronicles 12, 33, it says, of Zebulun there were 50,000 who went out to battle, expert in war, with all weapons of war, stout-hearted men who could keep ranks. So that's a pretty good reputation. Stout-hearted men who could keep ranks. And in Judges chapter 5, Deborah, a judge, and Barak praised the men of Zebulun for rallying to the cause and fighting a enemy king, Sisera. And so no doubt their success came from who? The hand of God. Let's finish tonight with Issachar now, back over in Genesis chapter 49. Begin reading at verse 14. Verse 14, this is Jacob again reading the blessing to the sons. He says in verse 14, Issachar is a strong donkey, lying down between two burdens. He saw that rest was good, and that the land was pleasant. He bowed his shoulder to bear a burden, and became a band of slaves. So Issachar was situated at the eastern end of the fertile valley of Jezreel. You can read about that in Joshua chapter 19, verses 17 and following. This tribe was also near the Jordan River, and the judge Tola was a judge that was from the tribe of Issachar. And the men of Issachar, they would fight against, remember, that evil king Sisera, the enemy king. You can read about that in Judges chapter 5 and verse 15. David had soldiers from this tribe, Issachar, who understood the times and knew what Israel should do. You can read about that in 1 Chronicles. I'm moving fast. 1 Chronicles chapter 7 and verse 5. Many of the men of this tribe were very valiant in battle. But listen to what Jacob says again about this tribe. They're strong, a strong donkey, lying between two burdens. And of course, you read the rest. Today, we think of a donkey as a beast of burden, but in Old Testament times, kings would ride on donkeys. And so what Jacob, I believe, is saying here is that the people of Issachar are a strong people. They're not afraid to carry burdens. They're valiant in war, as we've already talked about. And so that's kind of where all that comes from. The tribe of Zebulun really produced no great heroes, but their everyday labor was a help to others. And after all, not everybody is a Judah and called to be a Judah or a Joseph. But of all of these sons, here we have how many? 6 sons that belong to who? Leah. 3 of them lost God's best blessings because of their sins, Reuben, Simeon, and Levi. They remind us that purity and self-control are essential if we're going to have godly character and follow God. Zebulun, and Issachar, they're kind of, to me, like everyday people whose tribes served others, but maybe not known for any great things. And, of course, we need people like that in the church, servants and, merchants like they were. And finally, then there's the son Judah that we've talked about. He's the preeminent one among the brothers, the royal tribe that conquered enemies and produced kings and ultimately produced the King of Kings, Jesus Christ. So there you have it, the first half of chapter 49. Next week we'll look at the second half and look at the rest of the sons, the 12. We'll look at the next 6 sons. But Jacob's family was a family with a future. That didn't mean that they were perfect. Didn't mean that they didn't have their problems. God's always working through imperfect people. Amen? That's me. That's you. And as we've seen this evening, I think that we can also agree, and we've seen this if you have more than one child, have had one more than child in your home, you see that no 2 children are alike. Very different. I mean, quite a difference between Reuben and Judah, or especially like Reuben and Joseph. And no 2 kids are exactly alike. Jacob's family was destined, though, to bring the Savior of the world into the world. Maybe it takes 12 sons to finally get one like Judah that will bring Jesus into the world, or even have a Joseph. And then we'll talk about Benjamin next week as well. But anyway, this was a future that was bright. Judah was the one who turned things around in his life and became the conquering, ruling tribe in Israel. Zebulun, he's a guy that experienced prosperity at sea. So that's a good thing as well. Unusual for Jews at the time. Issachar was strong, wasn't afraid to carry life's burdens. And these are the sons of Jacob who receive the blessing from God. Our families, as we live for God, if we live for Him, we too can have a great future as well. Even overcoming sins and problems, ultimately giving our lives fully to God. And then one day, boy, the greatest blessing you could ever hear is not, hey, you were a great warrior, hey, this and that, but instead, well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Wouldn't that be a blessing? I'm waiting for that blessing. We'll say goodbye to our video audience. Thank you guys for joining us. Good night.
Hey there, YouTube viewer. We want to thank you so much for checking out our video today, and we hope it was a blessing to you. Now that we've reached the end of our video, we're going to ask you to do two things. The first one is subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit that notification bell so you'll be alerted of any YouTube video content that we put on in the future. The second one, we want to invite you to come and worship with us in person. Every single Sunday morning at 9 a.m., we have class time for all ages, and then that's followed up by our 10 a.m. worship time as well. During the middle of the week, Wednesday night at 7 p.m., again, we have classes for all ages. We want to invite you to any and all of that. I think that you'll be really blessed by it. We can't wait to see you there.